right, maybe. Okay, it is 7 o'clock on June 11th, 2019. We're going to begin or call to order our regular governing board meeting. Not that there's anything regular about our board meetings, they're extraordinary. Roll call, let it be shown that all members are here minus Ms. Tweedy, and let's stand for the pledge. And then we'll remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands.
I move that the governing board adopt the agenda.
I second.
Sorry. Could I just make one announcement related to the agenda before we vote?
You can.
Thank you.
But are you allowed to? Yes.
The agenda for this meeting has been modified, the order, so that we can process action items following preview items due to the topics and the efficiency of the meeting. Thank you, Mrs. Ordway.
All those
I second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those against? Say nay. It would carry. So the first thing we will do is have governing board reports. Ms. Frank.
No report.
Woo. Mrs. Reed.
Last weekend, I had the opportunity to spend 3 days up in Flagstaff at the Arizona School Board Association conference. I also attended the pre-conference on Thursday and found it very informative. I'm so glad that I went. The information and the topics that they covered were amazing, and so much of it went alongside of what we're already doing as a district, which reevaluated just and reinforced the decisions that our administration team has made with social emotional learning and the steps that our district is taking to make sure that that our staff and our students are being taught holistically in making sure that we're meeting those needs. The first session that I went to was about assessment literacy. And as we're getting AIMS tests rolled out, AIMS scores rolled out to us, one of the things that the gentleman spoke about, his name was John Cronin. He's the VP of Education Research at Northwest Evaluations Association. The one thing that he really wanted to hammer to board members was that we need to make sure that we're educating our stakeholders on what we're actually testing. That when we see that only 60% of our kids were proficient in passing, what does that exactly mean? And so he broke down that information. And I think as parents, sometimes we don't always understand everything that all of the scores that are measured. We think that if our kids are at a 60%, that means that they're failing, right? Because a 60% in our mind is a D. And so I think it's important to understand where our students are compared to across the state, but also compared to nationally, that if other students from other states were to be given a test similar to AZ Merit, what they would have scored. The other thing that he provided us was, what is the cost for a family of 4, so 2 parents and 2 kids? What do those parents have to make in order to provide a standard of living, which basically means they don't rely on government assistance? So for Maricopa County, it's 69,500 school districts out there that are doing EAP. And so for the fact that Mrs. Moffett identified that and is implementing that for our staff next year is amazing. I can't tell you how many people came up to me afterwards and said, "Can I have your HR person's contact information? We need to know what this is. How does this work? How are you doing it?" And I didn't have much more information to share other than it's happening because I didn't roll it out. But it was such a neat opportunity to share the good things that Deer Valley is doing. And then the last point that really hit home for me was about communication. This last year, the governing board has asked for so many points of data, and the administration has done an amazing job at providing those points of data for us through surveys, through satisfaction surveys, through parent surveys about the budget, about the bond and override. And the main point that came about was when we're communicating, it's important as leaders that we're saying we're doing this because we heard you. And we're implementing this change because we heard you, but that we need to communicate the way that our stakeholders listen. So we can say that we communicate that we heard you and we're doing this at the governing board meeting, but if our stakeholders don't watch the governing board meeting, then they don't know that we're doing it because we heard them. So as we have our board retreat over the next week and a half, I'm looking forward to having that conversation about how do our stakeholders communicate? How do they communicate to us? How are they communicating to one another? And how can we, as a governing board, tap into that so that people understand that we really do care about what you have to say, and we are doing our best to make the district a place that you are proud to either have your student in, proud to be a student in and to learn and to graduate, or to proud to work and teach in. So thank you.
Mrs. O'Brien.
So Mrs. Reed did an excellent job of articulating much of what we learned at our Summer Leadership Institute this last week. So thank you. And I was happy to be able to attend those sessions and see that we are doing some great things, and then we have some areas that we can borrow some ideas from some other folks as well. I was able to sneak in the keynote to get to see the keynote speaker at the DVUSD Tech Fest. So thank you to all who are involved in putting that together. Dr. Torres was awesome. One of the key questions he asked, which I think it was a light bulb moment, is how do we measure learning versus knowledge for me? So I hope we can focus on that, and maybe our parents take a step back and think about that as well, since really a lot of our knowledge is right at our fingertips on those phones everybody has. The other thing that I would like to highlight from the Summer Leadership Institute was that Dr. Timothy Ogle, who's the director, challenged all the school board members to take a moment and reflect as they are doing their jobs as school board members and know when to lead with their heads and when to lead with their hearts. I think that because we talked so much about the social and emotional well-being of our staffs, our students, that's an important thing to remember as well. I want to thank all the principals and school staff that invited us to so many end of the year events and activities this last, April and May. It really was wonderful to have those opportunities to be on campuses, and I just want to thank them for taking the initiative to include the school board members at those events. And finally, we had a couple of really nice emails from Mrs. Manier from Terramar and from her staff member about the opportunity to attend the professional learning community training that they did as a school. Mrs. Manier went into quite a bit of detail in how they spent their time there, having morning meetings, convening after the work sessions were over, and talking about how they were going to implement that. And they were just so incredibly grateful as a school community to be able to have this training opportunity, and how it rejuvenated them, and they couldn't wait to take it back to their staff. So I'm super excited for them, and they were very thankful to the board for giving them the opportunity. So, and thank you, Dr. Finch, for making sure that our schools know they have those opportunities. Thank you.
Well, I'll just ditto everything, except for the fact that I don't have a board report. So Tech Fest, DV Tech Fest was awesome for the amount of time that I could spend there. There was a guest speaker that I don't think we had to pay extra for. That was very interesting, and I think that was Dr. Finch. But anyway, so what was nice is that I think they said there were 200 people that had signed up for the whole experience, and they were charged with taking under their wing 1 or 2 people so it can grow more, because we should know by now that technology isn't really awesome unless you use it as a learning tool. So kids don't look at it as something shiny and new. They look at it as something else that they can use properly to become smarter and make us smarter. So the more we can implement that and integrate it, the better off we are. And there was, Kathy's shaking her head, but there was so much cool stuff that your teachers were almost floating, and it was summer, so I thought that was neat. The SBA conference was awesome, and I think one of the, in addition to everything that the other 2 board members said, stories are important, whether they're the student's story or your coworker's story, that if you do not take the time to learn the story, then you probably will not benefit as much as you could. You might say the wrong thing, you might not know that they have this talent, and certainly for children, how you address them and treat them and guide them from behavior to behavior. If you don't know why the behavior is there, then you could be giving them the wrong medicine, quote unquote. So stories are always going to be important, and I think it's becoming more acceptable to say that it's important. So I know, like, Paul knows stories, and all the great people that you know a little bit about you so they can communicate better. So I'm looking so forward to our board retreat so we can work on communication and our goals and plans for next year. And that, I think, is on the 21st. Is that correct? Yay! Dr. Finch, take it away.
All right. I just want to reinforce, too, the growth of the Tech Fest. I believe there was 250 there that she mentioned, so it even went up an extra 50. So it's growing. It's obviously, we want to thank Kathy Borgensen and Michelle Coots are kind of the 2 soldiers that carry the flag on the Tech Fest and promote it and set it up. And and obviously our speaker was great. I don't know about the superintendent part, but the speaker was great. Really, I got a lot from it as well. I think that what hit me was the point that he made. Are we creating cooks? Are we creating chefs? I'd never thought of that before. A cook follows a recipe, a chef creates. And so I thought that was interesting. We're making sure we're giving students the freedom to be creative. I just returned from the state superintendent's conference today in Tucson, and had the opportunity to be a part of Matt Haria getting a middle school distinguished principal award for the whole state. So congratulations to Matt. Congratulations. And the Hillcrest Falcons get kudos there for his team. And I just want to thank the board too. The legislative session has ended, obviously, and we moved the needle, and I know a lot of you had a part of that as well. So thanks for your support in this area, and we can never get everything that we would like, but we want to at least detour negative legislation or make it palatable and or impact the dollars that are coming to the classrooms. And I think we made a difference. So thanks again for your help. That's it.
It's the grading and reporting.
President Ordway, members of the board, Dr. Finch, and guests. This evening, Paul Strauss, teacher at Sunset Ridge, and Kathy Borgeson and I will share an update on the progress of the Grading and Reporting Committee's work this year. With such an important and far-reaching committee charge, a wide array of teachers, educators, administrators, just a large group of our district stakeholders was sought to engage in the work of reviewing, refining, and reforming grade and reporting practices in our district. We are very thankful that so many dedicated individuals took up the challenge.
Dr. Galligan, we can't hear you, so I don't know if someone needs to turn you up or not.
Okay.
Oh, that's
better?
good.
Okay. We have some members here, so if they would stand up now. Just wanted you to see some of the folks who, on their summer break, have joined us. It is important to note that everything we are going to be presenting tonight is based on the work of teachers by teachers. At no point in this process was there a set outcome. It was the work of all these teachers to determine how to proceed with authentic grading practices. And the vast majority of all decisions were made by a unanimous consent, and the couple of issues that could not be unanimous consent were voted on with 90% agreement. Our steering committee members have been key in guiding the work of the grade band teams and in working with logistical concerns. I want to make sure we acknowledge the teachers who also served on this group: Michelle Balsamo, Susan Bloodworth, Ambre Martinez, and Kimberly Smith. As you can see, there were a large group of educators who participated this year.
President Ordway, members of the board, Dr. Finch, and guests. Our current assessment research challenges the status quo practice of traditional grading. Most teachers grade in a way that we were graded, by percentage averaging and sometimes weighted collection of points over time over an AF to 100 point scale. Until schools link standards, criteria, and competencies directly with classroom assessment practices, we cannot reach full implementation of what Robert Marzano describes as a guaranteed and viable curriculum. And what we mean by that was, from the guaranteed standpoint, is that all students, regardless of teacher, have access to the same content and skills. And by viable, we mean that it's a realistic in scope and sequence to narrow the world of knowledge into developmentally appropriate learning targets. Because of this, we needed to limit conflicting grading practices within schools and across the district. As teachers, we assess and report what students know and is able to demonstrate based on a body of evidence aligned to subject area standards, criteria, and competencies. Well, collecting and recording student learning based only on standards, criteria, and competencies versus grading based only on various assignments changes classroom practices and expectations. In other words, grades should not be a result of a teacher lottery, meaning not a product of which teacher a student got. A teacher next door should grade students on the same way, because consistency and accuracy are the goals. So the two ends of the spectrum are traditional grading and standards-based grading. Transition into true standards-based grading is a very long process, but what the committees have determined was that we must adopt a standards-based mindset, which means that grades are truly authentic and are a reflection of what a student knows and does not incorporate behavioral factors. We would like to share with you the work of the grade band groups and steering groups and what we have accomplished over the years. From the team's examination of professional readings and discussions, some overarching principles about grading practices had emerged. These principles centered around the ideas that grades should report students' level of proficiency of the standards, and grades should not include behavioral conduct, but rather academic status alone to increase accuracy. And grading practices must support and encourage student learning and not be punitive. And that the grading practices must increase consistency among teachers to, again, avoid that teacher lottery effect. After many hours of investigation and discussion, the team had created this definition of authentic grading to guide their work. Each and every word of this definition was carefully and deliberately selected. And so it states that authentic grading accurately measures and reflects a student's level of performance based on mastery of standards.
President Ordway, members of the board, Dr. Finch, and guests. The committee was divided into two grade band groups, one representing pre-K 6 grades and the other representing grades 7 through 12. I will share with you the grade scales and procedures that were determined by each group, starting with the grade scales. Both teams realized that in order to accurately report student academic performance, the grade scale should communicate the level to which the student is performing academically. For the pre-K 6 grade levels, a scale of 1 to 4 was selected. Each level of the 1 to 4 grade scale has a description designed to communicate the student's academic performance level as based upon the standards for the course. Additionally, the grading scale has an equal scale between each of the levels, thus eliminating the issue of a single level consuming a greater portion of the scale. In other words, the 0 to 100% scale assigns a failing grade to 60% of the scale, while each of the other levels compose only 10% each and together only make up 40% of the scale. The mathematical complications with this model render the 0 to 100% scale as ineffectual. With the 0 to 4 scale, 3 is the target. Teachers are going to have to provide opportunities for students to get to a 4. Please note that a 4 does not equate with an A and a 3 with a B, etc., as we have seen with traditional grading. This is an important distinction, considering that 3 is actually the goal. For grades 7 through 12, teachers will use a 0 to 4 scale, which will represent the following academic performance levels. Each level of the grade scale signifies a specific level of learning proficiency. But whereas a 3 is a target for the pre-K 6 scale, for the 7-12 teachers, a 4 is given to show high levels of proficiency and is the goal. Teachers will determine what the student expectations are for each assignment or assessment for each level of the scale. Teachers will need to work with their PLC collaborative teams to make these determinations. Teachers will enter scores for individual assignments and assessments using the 1 to 4 or 0 to 4 grade scale. The scores entered will be whole numbers that directly correlate with the descriptor. The overall grade will be an average of the individual scores and will include a decimal to the 10th place. The overall scores will round up. For example, a student who earns a 4, 3, 3, 1 on individual assignments will show an overall score of 2.8, which will round up to a proficiency level of 3 for the course. These numerical symbols for the proficiency levels will be what's reported on the report cards. Class ranking is based upon weighted GPAs, which still will utilize the 4.0 grade scale with an added grade point for honors AP and IB courses. Transcripts will show a number for the overall course grade instead of a letter, but will still show the credit earned and the grade points earned for the GPA calculation. In other words, a 4 in a course will earn 4 grade points if it is a general education course and 5 grade points if it's an honors, AP, or IB course. Transcripts will include a key for grades and grade points. Colleges and universities use grade point averages for admission and grades for certain grants and scholarships. Colleges and universities will be able to use grades reported as 0 to 4 since they routinely evaluate transcripts with various grade scales, including those using letters, numbers, percentages, narratives, and pass-fail systems. As indicated by the proficiency level descriptors listed in the grade scale, students who earn an overall course grade of 0 or 1 are greatly lacking mastery of course standards and therefore cannot be granted credit for the course. In other words, an overall grade of 0 to 1 are failing grades. Note, since grades round up, students with an overall course grade of 1.5 are considered passing the course since the grade will round up to a 2, but having a 1.4 is not passing. As mentioned before, please do not equate these numbers with standard GPA averaging. DVUSD will use grades to indicate academic performance and not behavioral expectations. Although behavioral skills and attitudes are an important part of a student's development, including behavior skills when reporting academic skills, leads to miscommunication of a student's level of learning of the standards. Instead, behavioral issues will be handled through other means of assigning consequences, such as conferences, loss of privileges, discipline measures, and natural consequences. Issues such as late work, cheating, and missing work will be addressed as behavioral issues. In order to accurately reflect a student's academic performance level, teachers will accept late work and missing work for full credit. This is a tight expectation. However, there will be a limit to the amount of time a student has to turn in late work as determined by the school campus. All work must be submitted prior to the end of a grading period. For grades 7 through 12, A 0 will be entered in the grade book until the work is submitted. For grades pre-K 6, a notation for missing or late work will be denoted in the grade book. Students may be assigned behavioral consequences such as mandatory after-school homework labs, parent-student-teacher conferences, loss of privileges to participate in extracurricular activities, among other consequences. Additionally, students will still be responsible for current coursework, which poses the natural consequence of a heavier workload. When students are absent, they will have a minimum makeup period of 1 day for each day absent to submit the coursework they missed, which is part of governing board policy. Teachers will either enter an I or leave the assignment score blank in the gradebook. After the absent makeup period has expired, the late work will become missing work, and the procedures for late work and missing work explained earlier will be followed. Learning is a journey that is not often linear. Some students learn certain content and skills quickly, while others may need more time or feedback in order to learn. The primary objective of grades are to report where a student is in their learning, regardless of how much time or extra effort the student needed to get there. In DVUSD, students will be allowed to retake assessments during the grading period to show their current level of attainment of standards. Although students will be afforded extra time for learning during the marking period, there is an ending point for each course in which final reports on a student's learning must be conveyed. Because of this, final exams or end-of-term capstone projects will not be eligible for retakes. Additionally, assessments and assignments may be in an alternate format for retakes and redos. Teachers may also require that students show evidence of learning and applying of the teacher's feedback before a reassessment or assignment redo opportunity is earned. Each school will determine the procedures for reassessment and redo eligibility. Academic integrity is a cornerstone of learning. Students must present their own work in order for teachers to accurately assess their learning and to provide the appropriate feedback. Students who are caught cheating or plagiarizing will be assigned disciplinary consequences and be required to retake assessments or redo assignments, possibly under supervision or outside of the normal school hours or in an alternate format. The steering group met to develop plans to support implementation of the grading and reporting changes. The steering group's work included reviewing the work of the grade band committees and providing input and considerations. They developed a communication plan, determined a rollout and training plan, and created a timeline of tasks.
The timeline was created with the goal of preparing for full implementation in the 2020-21 school year. A soft rollout of the new grade scale and procedures will be implemented with first grade courses, both core and special courses, special area courses, this upcoming school year. The first grade report cards were updated this spring. Teachers have been provided with training options for this summer and early fall. A web page is under development for parents to be launched in August. During the upcoming school year, additional procedures for grades 7-12 will be grappled with, including assessment reporting, assignment weighting, homework reporting, and transcripts. Additionally, a guidance manual will be created for teachers and administrators, and report card and transcript changes will be completed for the following school year. Throughout this upcoming school year, communication with stakeholders will be delivered in advance of full implementation in the fall of 2020. The timeline of tasks to prepare for full implementation include tasks around Power School changes, development and changes to guidebooks, delivery of training, evaluation of board policies, and communication. You can see the list of initial preparation items we've identified. The communication timeline takes into account informing the governing board, parents, teachers, staff, and students in a variety of delivery methods, including reports, web pages, flyers, documents, letters, videos, and presentations. The work of the Grading and Reporting Committee fits well with the move to professional learning communities and teacher collaboration. Teachers working with their PLC collaborative teams will focus on deeply understanding the standards, determining ways to effectively teach and measure the standards, and to identify ways to support and enrich student learning of the standards. improving the way we report student learning of the standards through more accurate grading practices, and decreasing the variability across each of our classrooms is the perfect complement to our PLC work. We will continue to provide you with updates on the progress of the committee as they continue next year. Once again, we want to express our gratitude and appreciation to the committee team members for their hours of work and for taking on the monumental task of grading reform. Many of our teachers chose to ask to come back for additional meetings so we could get through all of the topics that they felt were most important. We really sincerely appreciate all of their time. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Ms. Frank?
So I would imagine one of the biggest challenges would be communicating this out to parents, because it'll be a huge change from what they're used to. How many A's, B's, C's did you get? So I know that you had a timeline for that. Are there any specific strategies, other than putting it up on a web page, or that you had planned for communication? Because I think that's really going to be essential.
President Ordway, Mrs. Frank, we have talked about doing something similar when Common Core Math came on board. We had focus groups, focus parent groups at campuses. We anticipate doing something similar in that manner, just to communicate out in amongst all of the other ways that we will. We know that that's going to be very important. I would like to add that for K-6, our K-6 parents have had a report card that has the 1 to 4 scale, as well as A, B, C, D, F. I don't believe it will be as much of a challenge for that group as long as we communicate clearly what that change on the report card would look like, because they've lived with a 1 through 4 over the last 6 years about. For our 7-12, I would agree that's going to be where we will definitely need to have parent information that is face-to-face, as well as opportunities for webinars, as well as surveys and seeking their input. But I will say that, as we mentioned at the very beginning, our teachers really did come to consensus across everything that Kathy shared, except for 2 items, and we did have 90%. And so our teachers that were part of this and were representative of not only grade levels but content areas felt very strongly. But with that said, we also know this will be a huge shift for our teachers, and they will be as much of a stakeholder group that we need to work with closely as our parents.
And just a couple of other comments. So what do you anticipate there might be some changes in how teachers might need to deal with grade justification for parents who are contesting a grade? Are there tools or resources for them?
President Ordway, Ms. Frank, I believe we are bound by board policy for that. And as Kathy mentioned, we will be looking at specific policies. I'm not sure that we added that one in, but we'll go back and make sure that grade change and the policy that directs our behavior, we look at that as well.
Okay. And then finally, just looking at the list of policies for us to review in the future, I had no idea we had a policy about IKEA.
Exactly.
I look forward to looking at that one in the future.
Well, there's that other one that starts with a D.
Right. Well, I saw that one was back up there. I felt slightly threatened. But those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one very big request. The script that you were reading off of, is it possible to send that to us? You had some great examples of numbers that you said way too fast for me to be able to write everything down, and I'd like to be able to read through those so I know how to explain what was said tonight to other stakeholders that I'm sure will have questions. And then one of the things that you mentioned was that the schools will be able to decide what the time length is to accept late work. Will that be something where schools that are similar will be able to collaborate, so we don't have one school that says you have 9 weeks to turn in late work, and then we have another school that is similar that says you only have 2 weeks to turn in? That's my antenna went up as a parent that, depending on which school and which principal and philosophy, there might be a little bit of a difference, or a big difference in that?
President Orway and Ms. Reed, as we move forward next year and working with our principals and our levels, I think that would be a great topic for them to discuss so that they can probably come to some common practices and some common decisions, or at least be within a certain realm of less variation within those different grade levels between the schools.
President Ordway, Mrs. Reed, we also, how we designed most of these policies is we wanted to come up with that balance between tight expectations of things that all schools were going to have to follow and all teachers, but then give some variability as well for a school to actually be able to have a little bit of flexibility based on their population and about the circumstances that are going through there. So we didn't want to actually drive just strict policy that everyone has to follow exactly the same areas there. The main tenets are all those tight policies, but there is some loose expectations that a school would be able to work with as well.
No, I certainly appreciate that, and I'm thankful for that, because we do have some school populations that their students might be able to have higher academic achievement if late homework was able to be accepted later. I just have a jailhouse lawyer as one of my children, and I could see him saying, but Mom, I want to go to that school because I heard that school lets me turn in my homework later. We do a lot of that with getting homework packets on Monday, and I don't have to do any work until Thursday night, and then we cram it all in Thursday evening so we can turn it in on Friday. So if anybody else has jailhouse lawyer children like I do, that would just be a concern as a parent.
Just tell him none of his friends go to that other school. That'll shut it down.
And then this is more a question for Dr. Finch. As these trainings are rolled out, can we have permission to attend them so we can better understand as governing board members, knowing that we'll get questions, just to learn the process more of what that looks like?
Good question. Usually I don't, but this case it might be unique because of the significance of the change. There might be better opportunities to where the board could insert into trainings for sure. We'll talk about that. There'll probably be more technical trainings that would be just for teachers, for example. There'll be technical trainings for principals, but there might be global trainings that might be useful. Or, I don't know, we might even record them. I don't know, maybe Dr. Gallen has some thoughts on that. But in general, I'm usually not a fan of that, but I hear your point of being able to explain it to your constituency, so that makes sense. So maybe we can find something in the middle. I don't know, Dr. Gallen?
President Ordway and Ms. Reed, many of our trainings will be through either Canvas or webinar, and so you would be able to access anything that we have available. Some of them will be generic and general, just a larger picture, and then some of them will be very specific to, say, Power School and how that would look.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. O'Brien?
I just would ditto that last request from Mrs. Reed, and maybe when those are available, they can make sure they're put in a board update. I think that this is certainly an instance where your board members can help to educate the community and parents, and we want to make sure we're doing it properly so that when we're in the produce aisle, right, Mrs. Frank, and somebody asks us a question about Spanish, we can help to explain that better. So I would
I shop at the farmer's market on the other side of town. Don't have that problem.
I think I'll take that under advisement. I want to thank you all for all your work and tell you also, though, that I'm very appreciative, although I don't have any jailhouse lawyer children anymore. They've grown up. That you have the tight and loose expectations, because I do think it's still important to allow our school principals and teachers on those campuses to have some flexibility and autonomy to decide what works best for their stakeholders and their community members. So thank you for all the work you've done and the great presentation tonight.
Well, I will ditto everything, and great job with even tackling this, because it's been going on for a long time to figure out, why do I get my kid aced the test, so they never turned in homework. Did they actually need to practice? No, maybe not. But to that point, the late assignment, whatever, would in from all the things that I've listened from the teachers, conferences, so on and so forth, the lateness or the credit for that is more an individual need for a student than a blanket rule. You have 7 days. If you haven't turned it in, or you don't get it, because if you unless it's the end of the quarter and then all that work is done, and it doesn't matter if you turned it into me in the next quarter, it kind of defeats the purpose of mastering something that you're getting a grade for. And you don't want to have it classroom to classroom that has different amount of time that you can have it. So if it's based more, perhaps just throw this out there, on an individual need for that student, then you're meeting the student's need, and you're also respecting equity amongst our kids. So just throwing that out there. Thank you.
I just want to add too that this is not big. This is monumental. This is moving a lot of cheese in the district. And so when you teachers, I know personally, I graded the way I graded my students the way I was graded, and it's going to be tough to break that chain. And so it's going to take training and explanation and more training and more explanation. But you're starting off on the right foot, putting in the time and getting players to step up and help contribute. And so I know your committee had like 40 or some crazy number on it to start, and then just the amount of time that you put into it. Thanks, because this will be transformative as well. So good job.
We have Mr. Miglerino with the Fiscal and Business Services reports.
President Ordway, members of the board, Dr. Finch, I intend to be brief this evening. So we have 2 reports to share with you. The first being the financial report for the month of May. I'll just note that this now includes the May budget revision that was approved back in May. So that revision added just over $2.5 million to our budget capacity. And again, that's due to the current year funding and the fact that we have more students than we expected for this year. We had some expenses related with that. It yields a projected carry forward of just over $1.6 million. We were at $1 million when we looked at this a month ago. Coincidentally, we were at $1 million when we looked at this a year ago. So year over year for May of 2018 to May of 2019. About a $650,000 increase. And again, that is largely due to the fact that we had a greater budget than we anticipated this year due to the increase in students. And I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding the May financial reports.
We have 0 questions for you.
And then just as fate would have it for the student enrollment report, instead of getting you the very last day, we gave you the second to the last day, just the cycle that we're at. Again, showing just about 0.1% increase over a year ago, we needed one more student to round this to 33,800, but 33,799 students is how we finished the year. I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding student enrollment.
Did you find that student?
Still on the
Apparently
lookout.
not. Okay, you're still looking?
I know with Ms. Allred's efforts, we'll have at least several of those in kindergarten.
And I think the demographer had us as -4 or something, -3. So that's a plus for the district to be going in the right direction.
Well, I'm willing to enroll my son's cat if that will help. He lives at my house.
We'll take him.
He needs some training.
I don't think so. Not allowed. But thank you for your offer. And thank you, Ms. Miglerino.
And next we have Dr. Smith with the AZ Merit and Ames results, correct?
Correct.
Yay.
President Ordway, members of the governing board, Dr. Finch. Can you hear me better now? Okay.
Ooh, that's even better.
Tonight, Dr. Galligan and I have a quick report on AZ Merit and AIMS Science results, our state testing results. In a way, I consider this a preliminary report. Preliminary for a couple of reasons. We're still in a period of data correction, so there still will be some data corrections. All this happens every year, and there are essentially no impact to the overall numbers by school or for the district. Second reason is basically what we're going to show you are proficiency rates. We still don't have all of the other data that go into state accountability, the growth scores, and the other components. They will probably be out in late June or early July, but we want to take this opportunity to just show you where we came out on the AZ Merit and the AIMS results. The first chart I'm going to show you, I've shown you this chart for a couple of years now, which is basically 3 years worth of math proficiency scores by the test taken. So there's a third grade math test and a fourth grade math test all the way up to the high school test of Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry. So you can look across here and see what the trends look like for all 3 years for each test taken, and then you can also compare to the overall state average for those subject areas and grade level areas. And then finally on the far right, you can see overall where we fill out for math, which reflects another important point to Mrs. Reed's board report about what do you look at when you look at some of these results, and we want to see this trend continue to go up. So it's gone up every year that we've taken the AZ Merit test, and now we're at 57% overall for all. This is all students, so whether they're full academic year students or not, all students that took the test in our district in 2019. Same slide for ELA now. You see 3 years worth of trend by test, ELA grade 3 all the way up to grade 11, and the state results in the purple or blue, and then the trend for overall, also 4-year trend of improving for overall for our ELA results. Maybe now as you drill down a little bit, and maybe more importantly is to start to understand how different schools are moving. This is the change in the percent passing from 2018 to 2019 for all math tests across the district. So you can see schools moving up and schools moving down. Probably the highlight here is the 5 high schools on the far right. You can see they all had improvement in their overall results year over year. Some of them fairly dramatic. I think Santa Fe O'Connor's at 13.8% overall improvement for their math assessments. This is the same slide now for ELA, change year over year. This is very encouraging in some ways to me, in a couple of ways actually. If you notice, they're clumped with K-6 schools first, and then K-8 schools, then middle schools and high schools. Every single one of our K-6 schools had improvement in their ELA results. Again, some dramatic improvements with Mountain Shadows over 13%. And again, all 5 high schools had improvement in ELA. So all 5 high schools improved in both math and ELA. Just to let you know that there are several reports out on the portal page, on the data analysis portal page, accessible by every employee and all board members. The first report is the AZ Merit Results Chart, which is an interactive report where you can change schools, you can change tests, and you can get drilled down results. You can see subpopulation results, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's a mastery level showing the mastery of different super domains and the writing point charts, and there's cross tabs by cohorts, how a cohort did from one year to the next year, and then there's some nice heat maps there that show you at a glance what's going up and what's going down. A couple of other things in development. As soon as we get the AF letter grade data, that'll all go out to schools, and then eventually we'll get a state data file that has state, county, LEA, and school for every school in the state, how they did, and we use that to compare to our comparable group districts, and also to compare to charter schools. And then finally, we build off, after we get that data, we build roster files so every teacher will know how they did, their kids did in their class last year, and how their kids did last year in the class that they're getting this year. So all those will be in development as soon as we get that AF letter grade data. couple of observations, at least I had off of this. You know, if you counted real quickly, you would have seen that 20 schools improved their math proficiency rates, 27 improved their ELA proficiency rates. 5 of the grade level math assessments had improvement, and 7 of the grade level ELA assessments had improvement. And then a couple of shout outs. I think, again, I've mentioned already, but Mountain Shadows ELA scores improved by 13.7%, and Arrowhead and Park Meadows both improved by over 11. And Sonoran Foothills with the highest math proficiency at 80%, Legend Springs with the highest ELA proficiency at 78%. And I've already mentioned this one too, that all 5 high schools improved in both math and ELA, with Santa Fe O'Connor at the highest improvement at 13.8. That's always my favorite part, when I get to shout out for different schools. And I don't know if you remember past reports, but this is the first report where I've had shout outs for high schools. So that's a very cool result. One other observation I have here, I always like to see how our Title I schools are doing versus the non-Title I schools, as that's one little sub goals we have here, is to continue to close gaps to subpopulations. So probably the easiest one is to look at the change on the one on the bottom right. That shows the change year over year of those proficiency rates. So you can see, if you look at Title I, math actually dropped a little bit while non-Title I went up. So that gap widened. However, ELA Title I had a bigger improvement than the non-title ELA, so that gap closed. So math widened a little bit and ELA closed a little bit. If you also notice with the green bars, they both of those gaps were narrowed for math and ELA last year. So it's 2 years in a row for math. AIM Science results, just a couple of slides here. This is a real high level showing just the 4th grade, 8th grade, and high school results year over year. Not as good as a story, maybe overall. We see overall for the district on the far right, we see what's a slight downward trend. That's a downward trend the year before too, as we were trying to reverse. The big good news here is we saw high schools improve overall, with 4 of the high schools showing improvement in their proficiency rates. There are reports out on our portal page also for this, some proficiency charts, some FAME charts, which stand for falls far below, approaches, meets, and exceeds. So there's those charts, and there's some other heat maps, and there's my highlight, my observation for the 5 high schools.
President Ordway, members of the board, and Dr. Finch. After seeing those results and knowing where we are going next year, we have some preliminary next steps to continue to support growth and outcomes for kids. Specifically, the work with teacher collaboration next year in the PLC process. We know that, as you heard in the grading and reporting, the focus on standards, which are directly aligned with our state assessment, is going to be important. So providing and supporting our teacher teams and our schools with content standard maps, the development of an unwrapping the standards template, ensuring that we understand, first of all, you mentioned assessment literacy, but understanding what is true formative assessment. It is not 25 questions, it's 2 to 5 questions, and having aligned formative assessments for those standards, and then providing ongoing professional development. Then we also know for all of our schools, teachers and students, just making sure that all of our departments are supporting and providing aligned support for that PLC process and teacher collaboration on those identified Friday early releases. We have also utilized, and you've heard us mention John Hattie's work, so identifying specific strategies that have high effect sizes, similar to teacher clarity and teacher efficacy, and working on building effective best practices and strategies with our teacher teams. Then also providing content training for our ELA and math, special education, and EL teachers and support staff. We know that we are in targeted school improvement for our high schools and 3 other schools. So making sure that we have plans in place and how we can support those teachers and ensure that outcomes for our special ed and English language learners is as high as our gen ed. And as Scott mentioned, that's a data point that we do follow. And then, as we know, we have new science, and social studies standards. So next year is our transition year with full implementation in the 2020-21 year. So next year, building the necessary foundations and training and understanding for our teachers who teach those two content areas will be another area of focus. Thank you.
Anyone have questions? Mrs. O'Brien has questions.
Do we have any idea when we might be expecting that report that you referred to, Dr. Smith, that will let us give out the detail to everybody?
President Ordway, Ms. O'Brien, so it's still an unknown, to tell you the truth, but they have said it should be in late June, early July.
Of this year?
2019, yes.
And on page, well, it's on page 3 for me. It's the AZ Merit and AZ Merit, the math and ELA change in percent slides. Are those available for the prior couple years in the portal? Or that one and the one before it? Yes, those two.
President Ordway, Ms. O'Brien, yes, they are available in that first document, that 2016 AZ Merit Results Charts, shows a change year over year for a couple of years.
Okay, thank you so much.
One thing that I may want to add too, overall, I was very pleased with the results. We're seeing the needle move again. One of the hard parts, though, is if you are already at the top of your game, to move it up one more notch is often difficult, and that's where the real work starts. So when you're looking specifically at that chart, I would go down and check the school, and then start using other data points to kind of get your big picture, if that makes sense. I'll leave it there. It'll make more sense when you can look over year, that would be a plus. I think the chart at the beginning is the one that tells the best story for me. But yeah, good stuff. Good, thanks to our principals and our teachers and our curriculum team that are putting emphasis on the importance of academic performance. That's how we're graded by the state, so that's the game we play.
Okay, I'll leave that at that. Thank you very much.
No public comments this evening, so we will move on.
Oh, moving on.
I move that the governing board accept the administration's recommendation and approve the certified and classified negotiated language tentative agreement number 68 for the 2019-20 school year.
Second.
Any discussion?
I do have a question, and I apologize, I wasn't at the previous meeting when this was presented, but I did look at the live stream and looked over the documents. And I had a question about the prep period for teachers on the early release days. Can you explain how that will be handled?
President Ordway, Ms. Frank. So the language that was added to this section of the manual is really just to provide some clarification, or perhaps to answer questions that would come up because of our early release. So we do have early release now, as you know, and as Maria shared in the last meeting, we haven't had a huge issue with it in the past, but we do have questions that come up. So what this means is that on a day where you have an alternative week, or a week where you have an alternative day, that we would not be bound by those minutes necessarily. Mostly in elementary campus, we don't see this at the high schools. Elementary campuses opt in to typically two different models. And one model is that they go on a condensed schedule. So when you were at Copper Creek, that might have been what yours looked like, a condensed schedule where every time you go into a half day, you are getting a prep, but it is a condensed prep. And the kids are going to specials, but it's a condensed special. Other campuses go follow an A or a B schedule where half of the day you do get the full prep. So on those days or those weeks, those teachers that don't get those preps on those days would not have those total minutes. In the spirit of prep, or how prep is defined in the certified manual, the time that is given for teachers to work either on the half day in professional development, or in this case in collaborative structures, is also considered under the prep time, preparing for class coming up, preparing for lesson planning and so on. So either way you look at it, it's just clarifying that a modified work week could look a little different.
So actually, when I was at Copper Creek, we did the A and B schedule. So like every other month, you would be out of prep because it was a monthly early release. It really becomes quite a different story, and I think will be received differently by teachers when they're looking at the possible loss of a prep every single week, because that adds up to 180 minutes that they're not being paid for. You can argue that the PLC takes their planning time, but the reality is, you know, if I taught science and I have to set up a lab for Monday, and I generally set that up on my prep because that takes a lot of time to do that, I can't do that sitting in a PLC because you've already given your administrators directions as to how those days are to be used, either for professional development or for the PLC, is my understanding. So I think this sets us up to be very inequitable across the district, and because it'll, from what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's up to the campus administrator to determine how that's going to be handled, or no?
It wouldn't be any different than it is right now. When they go through the master scheduling process, there is in the certified manual requirement for who sits on that committee, which groups are to be represented. They develop the master schedule, and in the development of the master schedule, they're also developing what those schedules will look like. So it is done from that group, and then they have to take it to the staff for consensus.
Okay, well,
It is not the principal's decision. It is
it's done through the scheduling committee. Okay. Well, I do, and I just want to go on the record and say I really have a concern that we're going to have situations where teachers are now losing a significant amount of preparation time due to a weekly early release. So I'm just going on the record to saying I think that's going to be a problem, and I don't think it's fair to take 180 minutes potentially a month away from teachers, and they're not paid for that. I mean, I think that's adding to their workload, if that makes sense, because you can't sit in a PLC and answer emails and enter grades and set up a science lab and do all of those things that you would normally do on your prep. So I'm just going on the record as saying that.
They're being paid. I didn't understand that part of it. But your question is related to time.
Well, yes, they're being paid for the entire day, but if you don't have that 45-minute prep, those emails don't go away. The science lab doesn't go away.
Right.
The entering the grades and answering the emails doesn't go away. So then you're forced to stay after the PLC.
Yeah, I figured that out.
And then that's time that you, I don't say you're not paid for it, but
I understand.
it becomes a time issue. It's a workload issue. It becomes a workload issue for employees.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Reed.
I sent a question earlier to Dr. Finch. I received an email from the principal at Sonoran Foothills, and currently they have 478 K through third graders, and are on the verge of opening up another classroom, which would put them at 504 K through third graders. So I know that at 400 we trigger a 0.5 reading specialist. What would trigger them getting a 1.0 reading specialist? And to follow that up, are there other schools that are currently in the same situation or have been in the same situation where they've been afforded 2 reading specialists?
So, under this proposed option that you have in front of you, Sonoran Foothills could, if his numbers show, he would qualify for an additional 1.0. So the 350 is what will standardize the 1.0, and as soon as you go over the 350, then we would be allocating an additional 0.5, because that campus is so much more beyond that. he would get another 0.5, which would equate a 1.0.
Thank you.
Mrs. O'Brien, do you have any questions? Ms. Moffett, I just wanted to clarify, when you work with this negotiated solutions team, this was worked with the, who was part of the discussion for this portion?
Every year, 2 certified members serve on the team, and Maria, the president, sits on the team, and she brings one of her board members. And this year, that was Kelly Fisher. And then Kim Crooks served as BLT, and so did Chad Segersten, and I sit on the committee.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Anyone opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay, thank you.
Consent agenda. I move that the governing board approve consent agenda items 6A through 6P.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposition? There is none, so. Ooh. Did you pop up here?
Not yet.
There it is. Hey.
We're at preview item 7A, first reading of revised governing board policy, DIE, audits and financial monitoring. And that, who is going to do that for us?
I'm guessing that would be you.
Mr. Miglorino.
I think I may have drew the short straw on this. And we are going to call it policy DIE. We're not going to refer to it. We're not going to read the letters. It's an acronym. President Ordway, members of the board, Dr. Finch. So we have 3 policies that are part of a policy advisory that the ASBA, the Arizona School Boards Association, has issued in May. The first is the audit and financial monitoring. This had an emergency clause in it, so it went in effect right away when it was passed, and basically changes the requirements that were put into place but had a delayed implementation. So we didn't have to make any change to our practice. But this will change the policy that allow us to continue to use the same auditing firm, and just for purposes of, I think, the intent of the when this was originally passed was to make sure that there was some sort of variability in the relationship that you would have with an external auditor, so there wouldn't be a comfort level. And so we have tried to adhere to that prior to even the original law being passed by changing the team that comes out. So we use the same firm, we just change the team regularly, so we don't have the same individuals. It's a large firm that we deal with, so there's enough people that they can rotate through. But this changes that so we can continue to use the same firm if we so choose. Just as a point of information, we do issue a 5-year request for proposal when we issue our external auditing firm solicitation, and so it is subject to change every 5 years pending the outcome of that process. In addition, and I think this is important, especially in light of the potential for the board retreat coming up, there was an exclusion that would not allow us to utilize the firm that does our external auditing for consulting purposes, and so that law was passed after the efficiency study, which was commissioned using the firm that we use for our external audit services is a large firm. They have a branch, if you will, that does consulting for school districts. Ms. Karen Smith does that. Performed our efficiency study, and so while this law was pending, we had the restriction of we weren't able to invite her back to actually present for us. We have invited her back for potentially to present at the board retreat. So just I hope I'm not saying anything out of turn here.
Spoiler alert.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But again, because the emergency clause was put into place for this particular statutory change, which included Senate Bill 1256 included other aspects of it, but it only speaks to this particular policy in the change to the auditing firms and the consultants. And I'd be happy to answer your question. Again, this is first reading, so we'll be bringing it back for a second reading and approval at a future date.
That was great. Thank you. Oh, questions? See how good you were? No questions.
I don't want to count any chickens yet. We got two more to get through. They're virtually identical. So JFAA is admission of resident student. JFAB is admission of non-resident students. You may be asking, as I was, why am I presenting this? Because our registrars are headed up through our technology department. I had them help us with this particular initiative. There's a backstory to this, but essentially this has to deal with how we prove a student actually is a resident and that the state has the obligation to educate them. It's not as much of an issue, I think, for our district as it is for those districts around the state that may be close to the borders, bordering other states, or, of course, our southern border. But this does clarify what documentation we can accept for proof of residency for both resident and non-resident students, two different policies, JFAA and JFAB. That's it.
Articulated very well. Again, no questions.
So that covered items B and C, and so now we're on to the Bond and Override Citizen Advisory Committee update, which I believe leads us back to you once again, Mr. Miglierino.
Wow. He's a hard one.
I think you might have me for a couple of items here.
I'm thinking so as I look down the list all the way to F.
Was that a spoiler alert?
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's another spoiler alert for you.
Yeah, we'll try to come up with some more questions.
Okay.
Don't try too hard.
Don't try unnecessarily there.
Could you please give your report? How's
This
that
is
question?
the Bond and Override Citizens Advisory Committee report. We shared this information with the board last time, and there was some discussion at the last meeting about we had it as a report because it was a committee. It's the exact same report. I'll go through it quickly in the interest of time, the discussion at the last meeting was that it was not shown as a preview. So because there is a pending action item that, as a result, a recommendation or two recommendations that came from this effort. So the committee charge you can see there was to look at building needs and educational needs of the district and consider any future elections as a result of that. We met 3 times, twice in April, once at the beginning of May. The list of members, we targeted 2 parent members from each high school region, not meaning 2 parents from each high school, but from any of the feeder schools, and then we tried to make sure that we had various configurations, so high school, middle school, elementary configuration from the parents. We had business partners, interfaith representatives. We had our foundation executive director assisted or helped us with this. Then we had staff members as well that were made up the composition of the committee. I won't read these. These are the agendas. So we did some school finance, just overview. We talked about some of the actual tax implications. We talked about school funding formulas, things of that nature, where how monies can be used and restrictions of funds. And we ultimately came up with a list of needs that existed for the district. And as a result of that, I should mention kind of history of elections. We're not new to having elections. It's kind of, it becomes a necessary part of receiving the funding that we enjoy as a district, not only for our operational needs, but to support our capital needs. The M&O overrides, although they're approved for 7 years, are only good for fully funded for 5 years. So that requires us to go back to the voters periodically to get those renewed. On the M&O side, this chart really just speaks to the dollars that we receive as a district. So the orange bars are 3 years of Deer Valley M&O amounts that we receive per student. The green bars are our comparable districts. Remember, I'm color challenged. The darker blue color, purple, is the state average. You see the state average is higher than what we receive. The state average is what gets reported in the media as being at or near the bottom. So I think we might be all the way up to 44th in the nation now in funding per student. But the national average, you can see, although the most recent information, 2016 there. It's worth noting that all of our comparable districts receives some form of an M&O override. Most of them are enjoying a 15% override, as we do. Speaking of the override, this is the planned use of the override funds for this year, fiscal year 19, that's just getting ready to conclude. So just over $27.3 million. And you can see the previous year, $25.7 million, because, again, it is a percentage of the revenue control limit, so the amount does change from year to year. The recommendation from the committee was to call for a November 5th election to renew the 15% override in its current form, continue to pay for M&O salaries, and that's just about 8.5% of all M&O salaries, maintain the class sizes that we currently enjoy, which the class sizes would have to increase by 3 students in every grade level if we didn't have the 15% M&O override in place. Continue to fund full-day kindergarten and other specialized programs for students, support extracurricular activities, provide counselors and support services. This is the one change, is we added the word counselors in here so that that it wasn't just student support services, that counselors were also part of the funding for that 15%, and then a small portion of the discretionary budgets at both the school and district offices, 10% specifically, funded from the override. One of the challenges with this, as we talked before, we've enjoyed the override since it was last voted on in November 2015, and so we're already paying for these things. So it's not any new money that we're expecting out of this. It's just to continue the things that we currently enjoy. And so there was some discussion about this, but in order to consider using the money for something else, we would have to forego something that we currently are funding in order to add something to the list. On the capital side, this is where I forewarn you about the small font. So this is where you might want to utilize the technology to be able to enlarge some of the information. This chart's not too bad, but the next couple slides get worse, just a forewarning. Blue bar represents what the formula would dictate we should receive in capital dollars, which is district additional assistance. The red bar is actually what we received. You can see it was diminishing all the way through 2015-16 and 16-17. Started to see some restoration in 17-18, 18-19, a little bit more. For next year, 19-20, another partial restoration, but still there will be a state-imposed reduction, and district additional assistance is not scheduled to be restored completely until 2023. So we can't count on that restoration until then. We kind of grouped a lot of these capital needs into, I'll call them categories. Student growth. So there's a new elementary school that we feel is necessary. This is in addition to the school that we're currently working on in the Union Park development. So this would be in addition to that. Instructional related needs, everything from textbooks to software and technology. There was a lot of discussion about that. There's a big portion of what you'll see in the final recommendation related to instructional based needs. Some furniture, fixtures, and equipment. There was a lot of discussion about this just because this is one of the things that we think has it has been neglected due to the state-imposed reductions. And really, I applaud the committee for thinking creatively about some options to consider that have given us some ideas to consider moving forward with that. Transportation needs, bus replacements, as well as our white fleet, which is most of the other vehicles that we enjoy to get around the district. And then our general building renewal projects for safety, security, conservation, regular replacements, things of that nature. So this is what that list looks like, kind of putting some dollar values to it. The statutes require us to break out the dollar amounts between administration related expenses and non-administration. So non-administration would be basically dollars that we'd be spending at the schools. So you can see how those categories look here. The administrative costs, quite a bit smaller of the total at just over $7 million. So it comes in just under $175 million. The entire list of needs and how it would likely be needed over the course of the next 5 years is this sheet here. The blue at the bottom are capital needs that cannot be funded from the bond due to statutory limitations. And so there's about between $7 and $8 million worth of needs that can't be funded from the bond for various reasons. And so the small amount of district additional assistance that we get, which was the capital dollars that's in the funding formula, would need to go to fund those needs. We think those needs are greater than $7 or $8 million a year, but we've been able to make that work because we've been fortunate enough to have the bond fund some of the other major needs of the district, for example, like our technology needs. So tax rate impact, we've looked at what if we layered in another $175 million over the course of next 5 years in 1 year installments, 1 year sales, and basically the tax rate would remain at $1.48 for just the bond needs of the district. And so that's not the total secondary tax rate, just that portion to support the bonds. And that's assuming that there's no growth of the assessed valuation. The assessed valuation grew over 7% this last year, but the way the statute currently reads, if you have to use a 10-year rolling average of your assessed valuation, and over the past 10 years, we have a couple years of large negative decreases because you're going back 10 years, and so that means that we would have to use 0 in the pamphlet in terms of assessed valuation growth. So the $1.48, even though it shows here that with 0%, the actual tax rate for that additional $175 million will be less if the assessed valuation goes up, and I will contend that the assessed valuation will increase, at least for the first several years of the foreseeable future. I can't predict 5 years into the future, but in terms of what the assessed valuation is going to do. So really, this was important to the committee because we wanted to be able to say what we're asking the voters to consider is continuing to support the things that we've been doing as a district with virtually no additional increase in terms of the tax impact or tax rate impact to the voters. So with that, the committee is recommending to call for an election in November of 2019 for a new bond authorization in the amount of $175 million. So again, this is a preview item that we wanted to bring back to you. We have our bond council working on the formal resolutions, and that would be considered on June 25th. I will tell you that is probably the last date that we can consider calling for a November 2019 election because we've kind of extended the window to be able to preview this tonight and then can still consider it on the 25th. But I'd be happy to answer any questions the board might have.
Ms. Reed has a question.
Mr. Miglerino, did I hear, maybe I heard incorrectly, last time when we went through this, I thought that you said that you were sending this out for comments from the committee. Is that correct?
President Ordway, Ms. Reed, yes, I did send it. I actually had sent it prior to the report from last time and asked for the committee to provide any feedback, and I've received none to date. And all of this information, including this presentation, is posted on the committee site. All of the work that we did at the 3 meetings that we had as well. And I have not received any feedback from the committee members.
Okay, because I thought that that's what you had said, and I just wanted to make sure. I spoke with a committee member and said that we were going to be discussing this, and asked if they had had a chance to comment, and the person said that they hadn't received it. So knowing that, is there still time to provide comment to this if they have any comments, or are we good? Are we done?
President Ordway, Ms. Reed, I mean, there's it won't be finalized until the board actually acts and calls for the considers calling for the resolutions that are in the recommendation. So if we were to receive any comments between now and June 25th, we would certainly share those with the board, either in an update or when we bring this back on the 25th.
Okay, thank you.
But I will check to make sure that the email, that there wasn't a problem with the email that I sent out that had the notice to the committee members.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. O'Brien, do you have any questions?
Not at this time.
All right, Ms. Miglerino, we're good. Thank you.
And we get to hear from Mr. Miglerino again on the fiscal year 20 expenditure budget.
Good evening, Mr. Miglerino. Thank you for this report.
President Ordway, members of the board, Dr. Finch, I wanted to recognize our Director of Finance, Ms. Mock, and her team for all the work that they did putting together the expenditure budget that you're going to see. This is the framework for the expenditure budget. We have not finalized a lot of the information that we're going to share with you tonight. And what I mean, it's not memorialized on the official state forms. We do have the forms, and we are working on those. We just got those, I think, maybe about a week ago. And so we will be bringing this back as a proposed budget for the June 25th meeting, which is kind of a preview in itself of the actual adopted budget, which is now scheduled for the meeting on July 11th. We have until July 15th to be able to adopt our budget for next year. So this gives us kind of at least overview of what we're anticipating to include in the budget to maybe get some additional input from the governing board this evening, and maybe from the proposed budget as we start to finalize. The adopted budget is, of course, once it's adopted, that's the that will be the official budget for the district. A lot of input that goes into the budget process. Board input, district budget committee that we had for the second time this year. The second year that we've done that. We only did it once this year, but it was the second year in a row that we've done it. Of course, NST, and then a cabinet and input from administration also is included in here. I mentioned the time frames with the proposed budget and adopted budget here, and I think it's important to note that the working budget that we have is the gold book that we publish, and then the state forms are the official budget that we're bound by. But the gold book is kind of what we use as our working budget to make sure that we're kind of walking in step with that. There are always going to be a difference between, well, I won't say always, there historically is a difference between the gold book, our working budget, and the state forms. And the best example I can draw to your attention is that we use 5 cash funds to be able to help offset needs of the district that aren't part of the state funding formula. So those are cash controlled accounts, and we'll show you what those look like as we go through this information. So just kind of, again, very high-level information here. The M&O override continues at 15%. It's still at the full 15% here. I should have mentioned this from the previous report, but actually approved in November of 2015. It's fully funded through the next 2 years, so we're going a year early, if you will. And there's some strategy around that to make sure that it's not as much of a high-stake affair, as well as trying to maybe avoid a November of 2020 election, just because that will be a presidential election as well. But override's fully funded at 15%, 2% inflationary increase. It's worth noting that inflation is actually higher than 2%, but even with the passage of Prop 123, it's not much more than 2%, but it's unfortunate that when inflation was just below 2%, we would have gotten that number. Now it's over 2%, and it's limited at that 2% with the agreement that was reached in Prop 123. Again, current year funding provisions are included. We are projecting no change in students. Again, this would be, if we see a slight increase again, that will again beat our demographer's estimate, which we're hoping to do. But we're going to budget at a flat number of students based on the 2018-19 student numbers. TEI decreased slightly. And had that, even though it's a small number, it had a significant impact on the budget. This does include the ongoing Prop 123 funding that we receive. For fiscal year 21, I know I'm foreshadowing a year in advance, the Prop 123 money statewide goes from $50 million to $75 million, so we'll see a slight bump in fiscal year 21. So stay tuned a year in advance. M&O carry forward is at the $1.6 million, which is the same carry forward number that we talked about with the May budget revision included in the May financial report that we spoke of earlier. We kept the staffing standards the same. I mentioned that there's one thing that was accelerated is the district additional assistance restoration, but it's still being cut by 32%. And as we understand what was approved, they only accelerated next year's payment, or the following year's payment into next year, still delayed through 2023, but we got 2 years in one next year, so it was accelerated for us. But it still cut almost $5 million for us. Here are the 5 cash accounts that we mentioned. This is what gets added in that makes our working budget different than the worksheets and the state forms. We have included $500,000 worth of adjacent ways project. That's specifically to address some needs at the new school in the Union Park development. And so the net increase is we went from a general budget limit of $215.1 million to $231 million. And you can see how that breaks down. So the $4.5 million is the 20% by 2020 initiative that the governor put in place. So that's the second installment of that. $5.4 million is the district additional assistance restoration. So again, that's the accelerated amount, or 2 years in that $5.4 million. You can see inflation and then the impact that ADM had as well. So our working budget here would show that we have about just over $426,000 unallocated in the budget here with all of the plans there. We do have a contingency of $1 million that's built in, again, based on the fact that we're having to forecast what the projected enrollment is. That's a pretty slim margin, but I just wanted to draw your attention to it. That's the only margin that we have in here. I'm sorry. In addition to the $1 million, we have 12 FTE that are part of unallocated teachers that we deploy when we know that we have needs when class sizes exceed the numbers that we have. So in addition to the $1 million, we have another 12 FTE that we're looking at. We have some budget recommendations that part of these are going to be discussed even at this meeting later this evening. So additional new positions, some district office reclassifications, student capture marketing. So that's marketing specifically to look at recapturing students. And then the reading specialists, that was part of the discussion last meeting about changing that staffing model. So coincidentally, that almost $416,000 is virtually the $425,000 that you see in unallocated. So if these are added, we basically have a balanced budget. And I say if because we're still working on the final board decision on some of those. Just some things to note from what we're expecting in changes: a 5% salary increase for all employee groups, almost 29 FTE in additional teachers due to growth, and then the addition of Deer Valley Pathways. A slight increase on classified staff. This is largely due to special education paraprofessionals. And then we have a provision in place for I won't call it the final, but the last increase in the minimum wage that was part of Prop 206. So going to $12 an hour as of January 1st is also included, in addition to the 5% salary increases that were mentioned above. On the non-staffing side, we did, based on what the board previously approved with the benefit recommendation, that's included. The state retirement, unfortunately, is increasing. So that impacts not only our employees, but our matching amount from the employer contribution. Utilities were not increased. We're still counting on our utility management team to continue to be able to find offsets to APS rate increases. We've been successful. We hope to be successful for next year as well. The CIS budget has increased. This stems from the change that we made a year ago to the Classroom Site Fund. So it's increasing $225,000. Just to put that in perspective, that budget that we were funding out of the Classroom Site Fund at one point in time was as much as $1 million. So this is a reduced amount that we're considering for the curriculum support for the district. We're also seeing a special education tuition increase of $650,000. We have other district budget adjustments of about $800,000. The majority of that is going to be in the addition of programs like the Pathways program, and unfortunately this also includes additional costs related to the transportation needs that we are unfortunately having to outsource. Side note, we had a job fair today. We had 31 applicants at that job fair. We received 31 applications from that job fair for bus drivers. I am clapping louder than that in my mind right now. And then we've established a capital budget at $7.7 million. And we're holding $2.1 million of capital in reserve that was part of the NST recommendation that the board's going to hear later tonight. And that's the second part of the district additional assistance restoration that we unexpectedly received as part of the legislative action. Again, there's a reminder that the state continues to have the state-imposed budget reductions. Just in terms of projected tax rate, again, the assessed valuation went up 7.2%, almost $2.76 billion now. And we're projecting the primary tax rate to decrease about 10 cents or almost 11 cents. And we're projecting the secondary rate to decrease almost a little over $0.015. So that ends up, that's the tax rate itself. You have to multiply that times the assessed valuation. And so you can see a decreasing amount of 2.7 and 0.6%, but an increasing amount of 7.2%. That 7.2% is comprised of changes in assessed valuation and new additions. So if you look at that on just the average assessed valuation residential parcel, it really means an annual, even though a decreasing tax rate, we like to talk about total tax paid. So the annual increase on the average assessed valuation home in the district would be $33 or 3.4%. So again, that's mostly due to the assessed valuation growth, not what we're getting in additional dollars as a district. And there's a lot of moving factors when it comes into setting the tax rate. We can go into this in more detail when we talk about the proposed budget. But we're no longer considering cash as part of the tax rate calculation. That was a change that was implemented last year. So again, it's a part of the statutory requirement for this year. And so whatever the levy is basically what sets the tax rate now moving forward. There's a lot of other components, including the qualifying tax rate, and that is a component of the formula that we have no control over, and it's set based on the statewide assessed valuation changes, but it actually determines how much state equalization each district receives. And so as our assessed valuation grows greater than the average for the state, then we receive less state aid. So kind of an inverse relationship is the best way to describe that. Because of the aforementioned $500,000 in adjacent ways for the new school, we are going to be required to provide a truth in taxation notice. This is what that notice would look like, and it does have to be published, and it'll be part of the process and part of the public hearing that will eventually take place on July 11th. So I think with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments, or ask Ms. Mock to maybe answer the questions that I can't.
That was a lot of information to
Wasn't it?
digest. So I think I'd like to take some time to look over it and then email any questions that I have at a later time.
I think that is working for all four of us right now. Thank you, Mr. Migliorino. Again, we have no questions.
The next item is the Deer Valley Education Foundation Memorandum of Understanding for the 2019-2020 school year. And for that, we get to hear from Mr. Migliorino one more time.
Yay.
President Ordway, members of the board, Dr. Finch. So this is a long-standing relationship that we've had with the Deer Valley Education Foundation. The MOU is an annual consideration, and we certainly are recommending that we continue it for the 2019-2020 year. There is one change that's being requested to add some additional time to the clerical support that we provide for their needs. It's adding 1 hour a day or 5 hours a week to that staff member who is already part-time. And we think that is necessary based on the increased activity that they are seeing as an organization. That's really the only change in the MOU for next year. There are some things that are listed as part of what they provide, and I think we used a little bit more passive language like may provide, just in case something was to change and would not be realized or may not be realized, but we are expecting no major changes for next year. I just thought it'd be worth noting that because of the relationship we have with the Deer Valley Education Foundation, it's the arrangement like we are going to enter into with Discover to receive over $12,000 worth of additional money. It's going to be actually that donation is actually going to be made to the foundation, and the foundation is going to pay for some of those expenses that are related to what we're doing for some of the coaching that's going to happen to support learning in our district. And it's because of the relationship that we have with the foundation that we can even do things like that. So again, just wanted to give credit to the entire Deer Valley Education Foundation and their executive director, Marie Brennan.
Any questions? Why, thank you, Mr. Migliorino. Speechless again, are we?
All right, on to our action items. I move that the governing board approve all employee out-of-state traveling per governing board policy GCCE.
Second.
Any discussion?
I'd just like to thank Dr. Finch for providing the update on where we are with the travel budget and making the good on the commitment to stay within that. So I do appreciate that.
With that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Okay. Passes 4-0. Next.
Item 8B, I move that the governing board accept the administration's recommendation to pre-approve the addenda as presented.
Second.
Any questions?
I did have a question. And I realize some of these, we approved some of these addenda positions tonight under consent agenda for the special education, I think it was special education strategists. They were receiving a $500 addendum for mentoring. Have I got that correct? Have I got the right job title?
What was the job title you said?
I thought it was the special education strategists.
Trying to find it.
Yeah, I'm on an unfamiliar laptop. Yeah, it's the special education strategist mentor addenda.
Oh. It's on page 5 of the spreadsheet. Their district office folks. There's 1, 2, 3. 8 of them. And what was the question?
Yeah, I was going to say what's...
Yeah, so I guess I'm just curious as to how this falls outside of their job duties and, you know, how that was determined. And again, I apologize, I wasn't at the previous meeting when I know that this same type of addenda was voted on.
President Ordway, Ms. Frank, included in what we provide is also the job description for each of these addenda. And I know there's, my staff would be remiss if I didn't point out there are 16 pages of pre-approvals tonight. So
Okay.
just so there's a lot of job descriptions in here.
Okay, yeah.
But there is a specific job description that provides the information that's related to each one of these, including the one for the special education strategist.
Well, not to hold up the meeting, I'll take a look at that later. And again, I know from looking at the consent agenda that there were a number of these types of addenda that have been approved. I just would like us to maybe really be cognizant of, you know, not adding addenda to duties that could be put in employees, either their performance pay or their at the county we call it a performance management plan, just so that we're, you know, being fiscally responsible with the dollars. And I'm not trying to pick on the special education strategist. That's just one that caught my eye in terms of what it was a mentor addenda. So that's just my comment on that.
Are we ready to vote? Are you ready? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Next.
C. I move that the governing board accept the administration's recommendation to approve the negotiated solution team revised salary recommendation for the 2019-2020 school year.
Second.
Any discussion?
I would just like to express my appreciation for including the 7 transportation positions reclassification in the revision. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Great work, everybody.
Are we ready to vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Quiet? No, there are none. Okay, where are we?
We are at item 8D, approve reclassifications. I move that the governing board approve the administration's recommendation for reclassification.
I second.
Any discussion?
I don't really have questions. I do have some thoughts I'd like to share before we vote so that the public understands why I'm voting the way I am. So if I have permission, I'll go ahead and share my thoughts. So looking at all of the reclassification requests, there are obviously some different types of reclassifications kind of lumped into one document. So that for the apprentice, for example, is one that that's sort of an agreement that we reclassify them when they complete a certain amount of training, all the way to a significant amount of district office reclassifications with managers, directors, and so on and so forth. And I know, Dr. Finch, you and I have had conversations about this. My concern, and it has nothing to do with the people whose names are on the reclassification list, because I have great respect for all the people that are on that list. So I just want to make that really, really clear that it's not anything personal with the people. But it appears to me that we are reclassifying people and not positions. So in my world where I work, if we wanted to change a position or move it up to a higher, we call it an MRT, market range title, we would have to eliminate a position, create a new position, open it up for interviews, and then the person who would have to re-interview for that particular position. So that in that sense, we're not reclassifying people, we're reclassifying positions. So that's one thing I want to mention. Another concern I have is that while in the total scheme of our budget, $63,000 may not sound like a lot of money, that's not how the general public is going to view it. If you make $40,000 a year, $63,000 sounds like a lot of money. I'm concerned that we're adding this to our budget, and we don't know what the results of our bond and override will be. Of course, we're all hoping that the voters will pass that, but if they don't, and I did see historically there were several overrides that failed, then we've added this expense to our budget, but we don't really know if we're going to be able to pay for it going forward. So that's another concern. Also, I've noticed on social media and just things that I've looked at, there are people in the community who are actively organizing in opposition to the override. So reclassifying large number of positions in admin just gives them a talking point prior to the override that they can present to the voters. I'm just telling you this is how I see it. This is how, what people are going to think of it, that I've never yet seen a survey that says community members want to see the district increase admin costs. So for those reasons, I think this is not a prudent move at this time. And again, it's nothing to do with the people. I understand there were workload issues, but there were cuts of the DO. There were cuts of accounting clerks, and school secretaries took on that extra load with no compensation. There were cuts to APs at the K6s, and those weren't restored, I think, until administrators agreed to take less of Prop 123 for their salaries and restore, I think it was a halftime TOA at that point. So those are my thoughts. I realize that what I have to say may not be to everyone's liking, but I just have to be honest about it. So thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Finch.
Yes, Ms. Frank and I have had this discussion before, many times. One of the reasons why I think you hired me is I have 20 years of experience in this job, and my job is to look at the overall picture of the district. And again, we've had this discussion. Our administrative costs are significantly lower than our peers, and we've just showed that data many times to the group. And I think Mr. Migliano has shared it with our interfaith groups, shared it with our PTO presidents, shared it with different community groups. I share it wherever I go with my conversations with Kurt about our efficiency as a group, as a district. I think we're very efficient. Yes, when I, and every time we talk about my evaluation at the end of the year, I talk about administration and where I'm going as what I want for leadership and what I want for direction and how I can more efficiently do it and get the performance. Because you can't get performance without effort and concentration in those areas. And if you look at our data and you look at our performance, we are doing all the above, as I predict we would. So I don't disagree with you. Again, we've talked about this many times, but I think it's from my professional opinion that this is what we need to do at this time in response really to the 2008, was about 5 years ago, cuts that we took at the DO in efforts to save the classroom and spare the classroom. And economically, I think at this time, this is the best opportunity to do that. And it's not going to be my last move either. I'm still evaluating 2 other divisions, and we're going to have some solutions for that next year. But doing it in small increments so we can be ready to afford it. And that's really what you hire me for, is to look at the big picture and make those tough calls. And I think that this time this makes sense to what I want to do for growth, for performance, and maximum use of my talent at the district office.
Ms. Reed?
Doc-
Mrs. Reed, sorry.
Thank you. Dr. Finch, per Mrs. Frank's comment, as far as she feels like we're reclassifying people rather than reclassifying positions, can you better explain why you're choosing this route rather than the route that she explained?
Probably the number one reason is you can hit reverse. So you can undo it quite easily. That's not a problem. In fact, we've actually talked about that scenario, which he's referring to. And I think I've mentioned it several times in my Friday update as well, that a couple of these positions that I've selected will be it'll be evaluated its effectiveness over the future. And so if it's not it's not getting the performance that I'm looking for, then obviously I'll change.
One more question. Mrs. Frank, without going to the point of asking you how you're going to vote, which I am not trying to do, but in your explanation, you had 2 different, I think, points of consideration regarding your vote. One was the way that it's structured on here versus, we're talking people versus jobs or titles. And then the other one was cost. If Dr. Finch would have changed it to be similar to the way that your job has their classification process and rebid process, would your vote be different?
Well, we haven't voted yet. So
Sorry, would your thoughts be different?
well, I think, again, I made several different points that are 2 different categories. Again, one is the process, and when I say, in my world, that's the county policy. That's the way it's done there. I did speak with Dr. Finch about if he could do this at a 0 cost, I would support it. And he felt he was not able to do it at a 0 cost. So it's, it's 2 different considerations, but both are equally important. Well, I wouldn't say they're equally important. I would say the fiscal impact and potential impact to the success of the bond and override are more important than the first point I brought up. But I think as a board member, whether people in the audience agree with me or disagree with me, the superintendent agrees or disagrees with me, I feel like I owe it to my constituents to explain my thought process behind my vote. I'm not just up here being Mary, quite contrary. This was my thought process and how I have arrived at my opinions.
No, I appreciate that. I know that had you have been here last board meeting when we had this as a discussion item, you probably would have, shared some of the same comments.
Right.
I just wish I would have had your viewpoint to consider prior to.
Right. Unfortunately, I was ill last week and not here, so I'm expressing it now before the vote.
Well, before the vote, I'll throw in some other information that this has been 11 years in coming, and there are many things that have been absorbed by all levels of our employees, that we were trying to work simultaneously, not one chunk at a time here, there, and everywhere, but we are working, I think, towards making sure that the talent that we do have matches the task that we have to complete. And I think our salary range for our administrators is not, hello Jim, you're not looking, is not exactly the highest. So I feel good about investing in people and making sure that the positions, if they are not effective, then are moved around as they need to be effective for our organization. So at that, so Brian, did you want to say something?
Thank you. I'm actually looking at a document that came out in an update, and it was a May update, but don't ask me which one. But it has the new positions and the reclassifications and the reasoning. It may have been the May 10th one, but for the new positions that there were 5 of them, it says total approximate cost at the bottom, 190,000 M&O, and then 72,280 grant funded. Is that do I add those up for a total, or is one inside the other? Yes, thank you.
President Ordway, Ms. O'Brien, you would add them to get a total amount.
Okay.
Total.
And the dollar amounts include salary as well as benefits. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And generally speaking, what is the percentage breakout of salary versus, and I'll take rough, I see that.
President Ordway, Ms. O'Brien, it would depend on some of the positions, because some of the lower cost positions, the medical coverage is a much higher percentage, but on all positions we have just over 20% of burden that's consistent for the that we apply towards the salary. That grows as high as 30% for some of our lower paying positions, and down to about 25% for some of our more highly compensated positions.
Okay. And I do appreciate this spreadsheet because it does go quite a bit into the reasoning. Some of the reasoning is related to the futures report that was done on our special education program within the district to help, I think, make those processes better, as well as the apprenticeship position, which it seems, if my memory is serving me correctly, that although that is a part of the district, in the past hasn't always been approved, not necessarily by this particular board, but previous boards, so it's not always a given. And furthermore, the significant reduction of district personnel, I believe in 2015 or 16, was taken, and I think while may have seemed fiscally prudent, was not necessarily best for our organization or to support all of our staff. My final question is that, and statement, I guess, altogether, the Auditor General's report that we receive every year looks at classroom dollars spent and admin dollars and a few other categories, and we're often beat up about how much those admin costs are and whatnot, but it is very profound and I think worth repeating here. Mr. Miglerino, if you'll help me out. I believe our district admin costs are about 10% on the most recent Auditor General's report, and if I recall correctly, you explained that nearly half of that is due to retirement benefits that we provide to district retirees after they've served very long tenure in Deer Valley School District. Those employees left with receiving full medical benefits. And if you could verify that what I'm saying is accurate, I would greatly appreciate that, because I would hate to misinform our constituents.
President Ordway, Ms. O'Brien, yes, that is correct. So in the category of general administration, we have over a $3 million expense for retiree continuing medical benefits that not every district that we compare ourselves to has, and so that adds to our percentage. But it is a obligation that we have that we no longer offer to new hires, but it is an obligation that we have and will have for many years moving forward. It will curtail itself over time, but you are correct. Our administrative expense, our percentage, I think, is right at 9.7%, I believe.
And is it accurate that those costs if we were able to remove those costs or put those costs back in the category, because at one time those costs were attributed to the categories. So if it was a retired teacher or retired teachers receiving those benefits, those were considered classroom dollars, but then there was a change made either changed by somebody above us, that they had to be included in our general administration dollars. So where would we be sitting roughly if those dollars didn't sit in that general administration?
President Ordway, Ms. O'Brien, the amount is $3.4 million. From a percentage standpoint, I'd have to do the math, and I'd be happy to provide that. But it would reduce the, on a just under $200 million total, it would reduce it by $3 million. So whatever percentage that would work out to be.
So I think that is an important, that's important data that is overlooked by our constituents or unknown by our constituents, that Deer Valley is working incredibly efficiently and effectively, and I think it would be an unfortunate thing to not vote for these, not vote in favor of these, because this district honored their word and continued to provide those benefits that are very costly, and that I know we no longer are providing them to other folks, but new employees. But we are honoring our word, and I know that there are organizations who make changes to those situations and they quit honoring their word. So first, kudos to us for honoring our word and continuing to give those benefits to those we promised to. But I don't think it's a good reason to make a decision against this.
Mrs. Reed.
Mr. Miglorino, when you are able to do that math, would you be able to break it down to per pupil as well? So like on the Auditor General's report right now, it says that for 2018, that we're at $738 for admin costs per pupil. Would you be able to, removing that $3 million, be able to do the same thing so that we have it and we can share that information with our constituents?
Yes, I will be able to.
Okay, thank you so much. And then one other question, because I know that constituents and stakeholders will come back to this video, so I want to make sure that we reiterate, and I want to make sure I have correct information. Last board meeting, Mrs. Tweedy asked whether or not these reclassification positions would also, on top of their I don't want to say raise that we might be voting on tonight, also be receiving their 5%. And I believe that that you said that they would not be receiving their 5%. Instead, they would be receiving this new rate. Is that correct? No. Okay. So they're receiving this rate and their 5%. Explain. Sorry.
President Ordway, Ms. Reed. So yes, to clarify that, the employees would receive their reclassification and a 5% increase. So it would be both.
Thank you.
I think, Jim, Mr. Miglorino, I think you should also include that a couple of those slides that you share with the community groups about our rankings in relationship to class sizes, district office, et cetera, because I believe we are the lowest in both of those categories, district office expense and student-teacher ratio. There's a bunch of great statistics on those 2 slides or 3 slides that you have. It gives perspective on how efficient we have been for the last 5 years.
Oh, Ms. Frank, did you have something else to say?
I hate to be the Cassandra of the school board, but
Cassandra,
just-
explain that, please. I'm kidding. You don't have to.
Thank you. I think this is a really bad idea before you ask voters to pass a bond and an override. And that's all I'm saying. I spoke my piece, so.
Well, I'm going to have the last word on this before we vote, and I'm going to say I think it's a great idea for us to invest in the school district so that when we do go out for an override and a bond, that our constituents know that we have the right people in place and we have enough people to do what our students need them to do. So with that, I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Anyone against?
Spoiler alert, nay.
And we have,
All right.
we have almost all voted. I know I didn't because it just,
She could
Cut
vote
out.
for you if you want.
well, I'd rather vote for myself. No,
Well,
I'm
I meant-
kidding. Go ahead. Aye.
Um, So at this time, I move to recess the regular meeting of the governing board.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And that's not because we're all very tired either. So we will.
You want to explain to them what's happening so
Uh,
they don't have to stay?
So at this time, we'll be convening an executive session to go back and discuss the superintendent's performance pay. And once we're done with that and we adjourn that meeting, we will come back out here and reconvene the regular meeting of the governing board for June 11th and vote on the final item, which is 8E, approved district superintendent's performance pay, which is the last thing on the agenda. And then at the end of that, if the governing board so desires, we will adjourn the meeting and be done for the evening. So we are in recess. Could we have a quick 5-minute break before we convene the?
If it's really 5 minutes, yes.
Thank you.
everyone is here but Mrs. Tweedy.
I move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 I move to call for an executive session pursuant to ARS 38-431.03.A.1, discussion or consideration of employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, demotion, dismissal, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of a public officer, appointee, or employee of any public body, superintendent performance pay. We need a second?
I second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're going to go to All right, it is 9:55, and we are going to ask for a motion to end the executive session.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I am also going to, yeah,
I move that we reconvene the June 11th regular session of the governing board
at 9:56.
9:56.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm going to, oh, sorry.
Do you want me to make the motion for the next item? I move that the governing board approve the performance pay for the Deer Valley Unified School District Superintendent Dr. Curtis Finch in the amount of 95%.
Second.
I am going to make a statement that says we appreciate Dr. Finch's attention to detail and implementation of his goals for his performance pay. He has earned 95% of this, as there is specific data that has not yet been released. So we have decided 95%. And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? We are.
Can you? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Would you?
Could you please vote?
Yeah.
Aye for me, Ann O'Brien.
And so with that, Mrs. O'Brien?
The meeting dates are posted, and I move for adjournment.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.